My name is Lillian Farzan. Today I am going to be discussing self-care, COVID edition. Alright, so before I dive into the topic, I'm just going to introduce myself a bit more thoroughly. As I mentioned, my name is Lillian, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I got my master's in marriage and family therapy from USC in 2017, and prior to that, I attended undergrad at UC Santa Cruz, where I studied intensive psychology. All right. I want to take the time to acknowledge that self-care has become a major buzzword, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when I reference that phrase in this video, I am referring to actions that we can take to help maintain our health, whether it's mental health, physical, or emotional health. Now, this concept was first thoroughly introduced to me when I began seeing clients in grad school. I recall my supervisor at the time, he was asking me about the things that I did because I wanted to be doing them or because I felt like I should be doing them. Come to find, I was doing a lot of shoulding, and I wasn't doing a lot that just made my heart happy. So that had to be adjusted. So I will give an example. Are you going to get your nails done tomorrow after a long work week because you want to and it's relaxing for you, or because it's supercharged, society tells you to, your grandma's going to give you smack if you don't, and your inner critic is running wild? Now, if it is the latter, then in my opinion, that is not really self-care at all. That is just putting a lot of pressure on yourself to get something done. So want versus should is a huge anchor when it comes to self-care for me. However, I will admit that in the last couple of years, things like doing taxes or deep cleaning my apartment or getting the dishes done, these aren't necessarily things that I want to be doing, but I have, with the help of a friend, reframed these activities as self-care because it's still in my best interest. It does help maintain my overall wellness, and it's sort of a way of having my future Lillian's back. So I'll get into how to sort of mitigate the weight that might come with that if you're resistant. So four major things to consider here. The 5% rule is a big one. I'll get into that one first. I'm also going to be discussing self-care lists as well as boundaries and self-compassion, which I'm very big on. All right. So starting with the 5% rule, this looks like asking yourself, how can I make whatever activity it is, filing my taxes, for example, at least 5% more enjoyable? So this is something that maybe you're procrastinating, you're putting off, you really don't want to do it, but the 5% rule can make this chore something that you're avoiding to maybe a dance party in your kitchen. Let's say that I am doing the dishes and I throw on some Whitney Houston, maybe I have some incense in the background, and then this chore goes from a dreaded activity to, like I said, a dance party in my kitchen. So it's wonderful to consider the things that could bring you joy, because let's say this is something that you integrate every day throughout the day. Imagine how much it adds up at the end of the week if you're integrating this into your habits. All right, so we're going to move into self-care lists. I want to acknowledge that times they are a-changin', right? For over a year and a half, I'm recording this April of 2021, so we have been in this new normal, which has been ever-changing for over a year now. And prior to this time, throughout the therapeutic journey of my clients, we would inevitably get to talking about the things that bring them joy and where they could implement those things more often. When the pandemic hit, suddenly things like leisurely walks through Target or boba dates were not as accessible. suddenly they were tension-filled, or they just felt like they weren't allowed to do them, or the world was virtually shutting down around them. And even my bringing up self-care would trigger a lot of grief, because my clients would just think about all the things that they used to do, and that is totally valid. It's okay to grieve over the activities and the people that you might be missing during this time. It's also pretty crucial to consider what you still have access to. What are the ways that it's still feasible to take care of yourself? Maybe it's not a trip to Jamaica, but it also doesn't have to be. It could be something as simple as perfecting your matcha latte in the morning, or feeling the sun on your skin, or watching reruns of The Office. So I just want to acknowledge a lot of people have had to adapt. We've all had to adapt. And this doesn't mean just because there's a pandemic that you stop taking care of yourself. It is still really important, maybe even more now because of all of the isolation that many of us have experienced during this time. Next, I'm going to be moving into boundaries. So I mentioned how everything has been changing and how there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that it's become pretty apparent to all of us that people have been reacting to everything that's gone on in the last year and a half with the whole gamut, the whole range of human emotions. And so sometimes it's hard to know how someone feels about something, if they're on the same page in terms of safety and boundaries and all of that. So something that could be really clarifying is having you make your own comfort levels clear by using I statements, which I'll get to in a moment. Before I define what an I statement is, I do want to acknowledge that there is no one size fits all. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so essentially an I statement, the formula is very simple. I feel, and then you insert a feelings word. You could take one from this feelings wheel from the Gottman Institute. So let's say I feel anxious when you tell me to take off my mask. So you see, I'm taking responsibility for my experience. I'm not saying to the other person, oh my God, you're so invasive, leave me alone. No, I'm saying I feel anxious, and then the very specific act that I'm responding to. So that right there is an I statement. And it's different than the alternative, what I said, you're so invasive. Something like that is going to get the other person most likely to shut down, because no one really listens after they're insulted. The wonderful thing about the I statement is that there's room for some empowerment, because you're really owning what's going on with you, and the other person can't really argue with that, right? They can't say, no, you're not anxious. I mean, maybe they might, but anyway, it does give you an opportunity to own your experience. The last 2 points here are emotional boundaries and self-compassion. So when I say emotional boundaries in this context, I really want to validate that all of us have been going through so much, and we continue to go through so much change, and we're adapting every day to changing restrictions and a lot, right? So we often lose sight of how much we've had to adapt and are continuing to adapt, and that sort of like record player, if you will, going on in the background, it's still happening. It still takes up a lot of space, and it can be exhausting, and I think many people don't realize that, and they forget to give themselves grace for all of the things that they're continuing to adapt to on a regular basis. So it's normal if you are more easily irritated or on edge or fatigued, or you're fighting with your partner because you've been cooped up for over a year. It's important to have that understanding and perspective, which segues nicely into self-compassion. So when your inner critic is having a field day, when you are kicking yourself when you're down, which happens to all of us, and when it happens in my sessions with my clients, I reflect, hey, do you see what you're doing here? Would you talk to your niece or nephew like that? And usually when I'm able to reflect back how harsh they're being and ask them the second part of that question, if they would talk to a small child that way, really able to sort of snap out of it and be like, no, I wouldn't talk to my best friend that way. I wouldn't talk to my youngest cousin that way. And I think coming from that place is able to give them perspective and consider, okay, you know, if it was my youngest nephew, I would give them a hug while they cried. You know, I would feed them soup. I would do something to make them laugh. I would take them out to ice cream or whatever it might be. So that is really a wonderful prompt if you're having trouble trying to figure out how you can be nicer to yourself. I also mentioned here getting to know your personal signs for burnout. So there are common things like stomach aches and headaches and that sort of thing. It's also important to get to know how your body personally responds to things. So I know that it's time to rest or time to come home to myself, as I call it, when I notice that I'm holding a lot of tension in my body and I might be at a level of heightened anxiety. All right, so that is everything that I have for you all today. Thank you so much for listening. And listen, it's not always easy, but I do hope that you can take time to enjoy the perks of prioritizing your mental health. It is so important, like I said, you know, now more than ever. And I mean, for me, it's like rain or shine or COVID. Self-care is really important. So thank you again, and happy self-caring.